the semi-final of this tournament. Congratulations to both teams to arrive here. And now we can start the debate on the topic. This House proposes a strong reduction of the copyright duration. We have for the proposition Claudia Signora and for the opposition Tosi Busta. So without any further ado, I leave the floor to the first speaker of the proposition.
Give me 1 second. My speech will start in 3, 2, 1, go. Hello everybody, my name is Riccardo Aversa and I am the first speaker of the proposition team. As proposition team, we support the following motion. This House proposes a strong reduction of the copyright duration, and it is important to note in this particular motion that right now copyright stands for 70 years after the owner's death. So, having said that, I would like to, before giving you our team line and our various arguments, I would like to tell you one particular definition, which is the one of copyright. We have defined copyright as the legal right to control the production and selling of a book, plays, films, photograph, or piece of music. And it is important to say that it is enforced by the state after the owner's request by making the infringer pay a large sum of money decided by the owner. So, after this definition, I didn't find many other words to define. I would like to tell you our team line. So, our team line is that we believe that the copyright duration should be reduced because it is limiting to artistic expression. Now I will tell you my motto, and next I will tell you the various arguments. So, our motto consists basically in a reduction of the copyright duration to 20 years after the owner's death. And another important thing to say about this motto is that this duration cannot be lengthened for any reasons. This is important to state because the current system is actually really flawed, and the second speaker will tell you more about this, but I will just say that it is because of lobbying. So, now for my argument. So, right now, the 70-year duration of the copyright after that is, I would say, problematic because it is limiting to the artist's creativity. I will talk about this, in particular, how it is limiting to creativity in art. While the second speaker will tell you how it damages poorer and up-and-coming artists, and how it is abused, as I've stated before, through lobbying. Finally, the third speaker will refute the various points of the opposition, and will also tell you why the positives of our model and our system outweigh the negatives. So now for my actual argument. As I've stated before, we have to wait 70 years after the owner's death to use, of course, with the permission from the previous owners, we have to wait 70 years after the death. This means that at least 2, if not even 3, maybe generations have to pass, have to die basically before the copyright law is lifted from that particular artistic piece. What does this mean? Sure, go ahead.
Why won't you think that this new generation could create new piece of art and new creation instead of copying them?
Thank you for your question. So, I would say it's not really about copying copyright. Copyright does not literally mean that you copy the same art piece. It means that you cannot use that art piece in your media. For example, I cannot use the name of Captain America. I cannot use the various characters that are copyrighted by Marvel. Even if, for example, Stan Lee, which is the main creator of many of these characters, is dead because of copyright laws. Of course, copyright does not mean necessarily that I have to remake the entire same artistic piece. So, following that, I will keep going with my argument. As I've stated before, 2 or 3 generations have to pass, at least 2 or 3. This means that most, if not all people who were alive back when the art piece was, we could say relevant, maybe it's better to say that it was popular or when it was famous basically, all of these people will be dead. And these are the people who were influenced the most by this art piece, especially in modern times. Why? Because, for example, the people who were influenced the most by bands like the Beatles, for example, or AC/DC, these people were the ones who lived listening to them and grew up with them. And so these are the people who are influenced by them the most. And probably their children too are going to be dead, or at least they're going to be very old. What does this mean? This means that the people who were strongly influenced by this, and as such, were the ones who could create better art about it, would be gone. They could create better art, of course, because having been influenced by them, they have made a strong impact on their lives, and for this reason, they could create better art. So, our models obviously would fix this problem. Why? Because 20 years is not really that much compared to the 70 that you have to wait. Maybe the people who lived growing up with the Beatles, for example, will still be alive to make music similar to theirs, or even if they were dead, their sons or daughters would still be alive to do this. So let me give you one example about this. At least one generation from this timeline would be removed. This wouldn't be 2 or 3, but they would just be 1 or 2. Let me give you one example of this thing. Let's say, for example, H.P. Lovecraft. H.P. Lovecraft is a very famous writer, one of the most influential, I would say, of the last century. And we could say that his most monumental cycle of mythology, the Cthulhu mythos, was completed by about 1930, which is basically very close to the period when Lovecraft died. The Yellow King, details about the Yellow King, were written about 20 years later, in 1950. So if the Lovecraft family had, in this case, infringed with copyright on these tales, the Yellow King tales, we would have lost one of the most important, one of the probably better, by at least according to the critics, pieces of this art piece of the Cthulhu mythos overall. And so this is why, with this example, we could see how had the Lovecraft family infringed upon the artists with a copyright law, which at the time was obviously way poorer, and the second speaker will talk about how this is particularly damaging to poorer artists, or at least up-and-coming artists who are not as wealthy as the people who obviously hold these copyright laws. And this is obviously an example of this case. Overall, we would say that this is a huge limit, the 70-year law that we have right now is a huge limit to new artists who decide to expand on existing art, especially, as I've said before, how the second speaker will talk about, particularly the up-and-coming and poor artists. So, to summarize our points, we believe in a model that reduces by 50 years, making it 20, the currently existing copyright laws, and I have told you why it is a limit to artistic freedom, in particular of the single artist, while the second speaker will tell you why it is limiting economically, and the third speaker will reinforce our model by making you notice how the positives outweigh the negatives. Thank you for your attention. My speech is done.
Thank you. 5 minutes.
So I thank the first speaker of the opposition team, and I welcome the third speaker of the opposition team.
Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Aurora Targa, the first speaker of the opposition team, today to refuse to what the other team said, firstly. And secondly, I present my argumentation, our team argumentation. First of all, as I said, I'd like to refuse to what the other team said. So, about your definition, we'd like to say that for copyright, we mean also the revenues that the author has after his death. So, for this, we mean all the increases of the revenues that the author has to have in order to respect his hard work during his life. I'd like to highlight that copyright is not just copying, it's more violating actually, and I explain it in my speech. You also told us that people who were alive at that time know and appreciate the artists that, I don't know, made music or create a book or those things. And I explain it better in my points because we totally disagree with that. And we arrive to a point where we have to forget big pieces of history and we cannot accept it. And I'd like to say that the action plan of 50 years is not enough because we have to strongly preserve all the people's love for their subjects who are dedicated on. So, I'd like to present our team line. We want to give the right credit to the artist since he has to be recognized for his originality and the new creation that he has made. So, I am the first speaker and I'll talk about the artist that has to be recognized for his artwork through the years. So not just 50 years, but more than 70 years. No, thank you. Secondly, the second speaker, Giulia Vegetti, will talk about the risk of an unfair competition. And thirdly, she will talk about the utility of revenues also for the remaining alive creators. So now, let me start with my first argumentation. We must recognize to the artist his artwork for what he has made and continue to respect him through the years. Why? Well, keep in mind that every artist, if he is a writer or... Yeah, tell me.
Wouldn't you say that a community, fans, expanding the artwork and making it even better and more famous, wouldn't that be respecting the artist?
Yeah, but I ask you a question. You, as a parent, would you like to, I don't know, talk with your kid, with your children, to a nurture that maybe is still important in your life, in your daily life? Would you like to talk about it, the emotions that it gives to you, the emotion that this author gives to you, and not all the copycats that he has received after his death? So, as I was saying, we must recognize to the artist his artwork that he has made. Why? As I was saying, well, keep in mind that every artist, if he is a writer, no thank you, a singer, producer of a play, uses all its heart to create a specifically work of art. Yeah, we define it work of art because these works of art are the creation of each person that have to implement people's life, people's imagination through the years, not just to that moment of life, to that moment of an historical period. So just think about the songs that we usually listen to the radio or in our earphones and know that future generation, as I was saying to my opponent, future generation can listen to them and not with other voices that do not have the credit to do it, do not have the credit to sing a song or rewrite a book that is not theirs. It's not their credit, it's someone else's credit and we don't want it, we cannot accept it. So we have to give the right credit to who create the creation that we're talking about. The impact of this dangerous action made by criminals, because yeah, we can define them as criminals, is really harmful for the remaining creators, as Giulia will tell you in her speech, and can destroy the revenue of the company or the remaining creators, as I was saying, that can see those money going away and do not see any revenue for their own work. So, but continuing with my argumentation, we, as the opposition team, cannot accept to give unfair credits to people who just stole someone else's work, without asking, no thank you, without asking for a license. Because, yeah, if you want to copy something, maybe, perhaps, you can just ask for a licensing contract, and this is a fair thing, not just copying it. Let's assume a work such as Se fossi un uomo of Primo Levi. In these 70 years, has represented the history of the 90s with World War. Believe me, you cannot imagine how can be harmful, how can be damaging for our history living in a fake reality where someone else has credits for a work that is not theirs. Did you want to give credits perhaps to a foreign man who translated it, or to a couch potato, an Italian couch potato who lived in the war in another country, so didn't live actually the war in Italy in that moment, just as Primo Levi did. So we don't want that. We don't want that creations such as books or other things have to be forget by people, have to be forget. People do not have to forget the real creator, the real author of those creations. No, thank you. Therefore, let's talk about something practical. With the internet. Yeah, internet is the most used platform nowadays. It's the thing that we usually have on our hands more often. So the diffusion of information works simpler, works easier than the past years, and we see it every day in our daily routine. Just think about the fact that now everything we need is on internet. Everyone posts things and everyone can copy them. And for that, we have to make the duration of copyright longer, more than 70 years, and not just 50 years, because it's not enough. Believe me, dear judges, it's not enough for the ethical point of view, as I am saying in my argumentation. We cannot accept that everyone has access, easy access to opinions, essays, music, lyrics that we can enjoy every day in our daily life. Copyright preserves the integrity and the correct and safe diffusion of each book, film, play, and song. So we're talking about an ethical thing, as I was saying. We're talking about the preservation of a single work of art. Because, as I said, we define them works of art. The respect for who has the right to the creation of that opera, of that act, of that work of art for itself. If you want to have someone else's work, why don't you buy the right to have it? Why don't you stipulate a licensing contract instead? Why do you have to copy it instead of, as I was saying, create a licensing? Why do you have to destroy historical things, such as I was saying with Primo Levi, books that are representing our history, are representing our future? Because those operas, those creation can also influence older generation, the future generation, that have to accept that the real creators of those works of art are the people who create them. The real creators have to be respected, and this is what this House strongly believes. Thank you all for the attention.
Thank you. Let me say seconds.
So thank you, first speaker of the opposition team, and now I will refer to the second speaker of the opposition team.
Okay, I'll start my speech right now. Good morning, everyone. Actually, it's afternoon, so good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nicole Pizzi, and I'm the second speaker of the proposition team. As the proposition team, I'd like to remind you we stand for the following motion, which is this House proposes a strong reduction of copyright duration. Before reminding you of the points that I will bring, I'd like to refute some of the things said by the first speaker of the opposition team. First of all, I'd like to remind the opposition team that once copyright is over, that doesn't mean that the work itself is thrown into oblivion. So it will not be forgotten. They've talked about very often about, parents, being a parent, and talking about your kids talking with your kids about things that you value, such as old works of art. Well, if once copyright is over and people expand on that specific subject, so that specific work, that doesn't mean that, again, the work itself that one person values a lot, it doesn't mean that it's forgotten. They can still, value that, so I don't see how that is a point. Second point that they really stressed, it's licensing. Well, that actually brings me to my argument. about the economic consequences of having such a long duration with copyright, and why we believe that our model, so reducing the copyright duration to 20 years, not 50 years, would actually help smaller and up-and-coming artists. I'd like to remind you of our team line now, which is that we believe we need a strong reduction of copyright duration because it poses a limit to artistic expression, and this obviously has some economic consequences. By reducing copyright, smaller artists have access to materials earlier. This means obviously that this encourages the production of art. In this current situation, artists, specifically up-and-coming artists, smaller artists who don't have the same finances as bigger companies and estates, they must pay high amounts of money to use such materials. And this is the licensing that the opposition team was talking about. This is not just hundreds of dollars, we're talking about thousands and thousands of dollars. And obviously, for smaller artists, up-and-coming artists, this is obviously not accessible. And sometimes, when there's even small mentions of bigger companies' work in these smaller artists' work, they have to battle in court to keep such small references inside their works. Obviously, this is, again, an economic damage, because paying, first of all, the production of the work itself is a lot of money, and paying lawyers to battle in court, it's also a lot of money for smaller artists. If we reduce the copyright amount, the copyright time to 20 years, they have more creative space. Obviously, they have more time. They're probably still going to be alive if the copyright time is 20 years, to produce what might be the next greatest piece of art known right now. Yes?
Why do you consider creative something that was already done before and something that is similar or the same as something that was done before?
Okay. There's a difference. Obviously, I'm not saying that the only way an artist can produce art is by copying someone else's. With copyright being brought down to 20 years, the duration, you still have, as an artist, the power to produce your own art and produce it originally. What this gives a different kind of, we could say, power to artists, which is to expand on the materials of, we could say, bigger companies. So it's not, again, copying the art, it's just expanding, as the first speaker said. I'd also like to add that copyright is held usually by big companies and estates who have billions of dollars at their disposal. This obviously, as the first speaker mentioned, it's a flawed system, and I'll tell you why in a second. The most relevant example that we can think of was Disney. Disney still has, to this day, copyright over most of their work. This is not done in a way legally. This has been achieved through lobbying, and I want to give you the definition of what lobbying is from the Cambridge Dictionary. Lobbying is to try to persuade a politician, government, or an official group that a particular thing should or should not happen, or that a law should be changed. Through lobbying, Disney has been able to elongate, let's say, the time of copyright on their works. This means that all of their works, which by now should have been in the public domain, are not in the public domain. This means that smaller artists can't use or even reference, because this is the thing, it's not about copying the work, it's about even referencing the work. So smaller artists, up-and-coming artists can't do this. About just referencing work, we have found another example. There's a manga that we want to mention. It's called JoJo's Bizarre Adventures. In a specific episode of this manga, some characters from a bigger company were mentioned. This has led the author of this smaller piece of art to court. And in this case, because they had the finances available to battle in court this bigger, no thank you, to battle this bigger company, they were actually able to achieve, to maintain these smaller references in this smaller artwork. But you can understand that not everyone can do this. So this is obviously a problem. Another problem related to copyright and how it is a flawed system is fair use. Well, there is theoretically a possibility for smaller artists to reference bigger artists or big companies, their material in their work. The problem with this is that the bigger companies, who again have billions and billions of dollars at their disposal, they do not allow fair use. And most of the times we have found they bring the smaller artists to court, draining them over the smallest details mentioned in their works, causing obviously to the artist economical damage and stopping art to be produced. And with our model, obviously this wouldn't even occur. They wouldn't even have to, sorry, I can't think of a word, but they wouldn't even have to reference fair use, because with our model, copyright would go down to 20 years, meaning that they would have earlier access, and it would make it easier for them to reference these bigger artists without having to struggle, again, economically, having to struggle in court. They could just be producing more art, expanding on art, referencing already existing art, without, again, having to go through all of these bureaucratical and law-related problems, we could say. Having said that, I thank everyone for your attention, and I'm done with my speech.
Thank you, sir. 57.
So I thank the second speaker for the proposition team, and now I welcome the second speaker for the opposition team.
So I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So dear panel, the proposition team is obviously trying to impose us the idea of copyright like a tool to limit creativity. But we already demonstrated, and we are going to demonstrate it, that it is exactly opposed to this. Copyright preserves the creativity, and I'm going to demonstrate it by rebutting what the proposition team said and by going on with my argumentation. So I want to rebut, first of all, what the first speaker said. He based his whole speech by saying that copyright limits artistic expression and creativity, and that copyright is not copying. Well, copyright is a law that enters in action when someone takes the creation of another artist just as it is and use it as if it was theirs. So how can we not define it copying? Like if you take another creation, no thank you, that is not yours and just use it as it was before without modifying it, without even just taking a bit of maybe influence from it and just creating something else, you are copying it. And that's when copyright enters action. So when is artistic expression considered as copying work of others? In fact, we believe that copyright, by just avoiding the copying of other previous creations, just enhance the creativity of other artists, because artists are encouraged of creating another maybe book, another music, another piece of art, because obviously they don't want to copy the previous creations. So so I want to make it clear that, for example, new generation, as the first speaker mentioned, could create other pieces of art that maybe are influenced from other creations, but are not the same. So that is not copyright, and so copyright in this case would not enter in action and would not limit. Yes, please.
Sorry. Do you not think that the people who, for example, lived with the Beatles could create better music about it because they have lived with and grown up with them and they have had a strong impact on their lives?
Yes, so if they create better music, they create different music. Maybe they take just the influence of the beat and the maybe topics that were of the Beatles music, but they do not take the exact same music, the exact same lyrics of Beatle music, and just saying that it's theirs. So that's when copyright enters in action, and that's when it's wrong. So I want to make a quick I want to make a quick comparison with the business license. In fact, for example, Coca-Cola has it, and no one can copy its formula. But for example, there is Pepsi that has invented a similar products, but not the same, to do it, for example, in a different or better way, and this is not considered a violation of the business license of Coca-Cola. So the second speaker said that once the copyright is over, it doesn't mean that the creation is going into an oblivion. So since we already demonstrated to you that copyright is copying, we are demonstrating to you that there's a high risk if the copyright duration is reduced, then this creation will be copied and will be ruined. So she also talked about the economic consequences. First of all, I want to ask a question to the second speaker. Why should artists not have the right to decide if and where their creation are nominated or copied? Because it is your own creation, and no thank you, and you have the right to administrate it how you want. So if your creation is nominated in another creation, in another book, in another film, without your consent, you have the right to say that you don't want that your creation is nominated. And she also talked about the enhance of production of art, but as I said before, if we don't modify the duration of copyright, more artists will be encouraged to create another art, and this will also be a production of art. So we don't clearly see your point there of the economic advantages. So now I want to start with my argumentation. So imagine this scenario. The main creator is dead, and in a very short time, the copyright is eliminated. So other people could just copy the creation and selling it as theirs. By doing practically zero amount of work, they would be promoting the creation as theirs, when in reality another artist or another creator has done the hard work before and has had the originality. So what is the critical aspect here? We are talking about new people that in a very few time would just exploit the also economic reputation of this creation and would earn revenues from something that is not theirs. So this is unfair competition because we are not challenging yourself in comparison to other creators to create something new or something better, but you are just taking a creation of someone else and exploiting it, taking revenues even though you are not legitimated to do it. So in our world, by preserving the duration of the copyright, the creation has the right time, even after the owner's death, to be established and to have a reputation in the market, so that it would avoid that people would exploit the revenues of something that is not theirs by copying it. So let's bring in another scenario. As we said, the copyright would be owned also, for example, by more creators if we're talking about music labels or editors. Imagine what damage could represent a reduced duration of copyright. In fact, this entity really rely on the protection given by the copyright, since it represents a secure income for their. In fact, if you have a copyright on a creation, that creation is considered as a unique selling point. Only you have that creation, only you can sell it, and no one else. So, no thank you. To connect my first argument, it means that you have the right to not have unfair competition, since you preserve the ownership, and most importantly, this income, if protected by the copyright, will guarantee the existence and of the other creators. So again, the long duration of copyright guarantees that the right creators will still continue to take advantage by receiving a fair return for the actual success of the creation, and they will not be damaged by the exploitation of just others that do not have creativity. So in a nutshell, in our world, with a long duration of copyright, even after the owner's death, unfair competition of people exploiting revenues that are not theirs will not be a problem. And the other creators would continue to receive their fair return as they rely on it, and their work will be fairly recognized. In the preposition word, importance and the originality of creation just basically finish when you die, and where people unfairly exploit economic benefits of creation that are not theirs. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. 740.
So we thank the second speaker of the opposition team. Now it's time for the third speaker of the opposition team.
One second. All right. So, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Hello everyone, my name is Lorenzo Del Vecchio, and I would like to start my speech first of all by refuting many of the points brought up by the opposition team. First of all, their definition of copyright. They seem to misunderstand that copyright is not necessarily just copying, but it is in regards to the works as a whole. So if someone is to reference that work, for example, I cannot use the name Mickey Mouse. Even if I don't use his figure, I still cannot say the name Mickey Mouse in my work of art. So that's not necessarily copying, that's referencing the original work. There's a big difference from copying and referencing. Second of all, another mistake they seem to have made is that they stated that the artists decide where their work is used. Well, in this debate, we're not talking about when the artist is alive, because when the artist is alive, copyright still is in effect. Instead, we're talking about after death. And referencing this, by their own definition, the opposition team kept talking about how it's unethical for other authors to use the original work of a single author or multiple authors to get their own revenue, to benefit from something they didn't make. First of all, in regards to creativity, as my team has stated, copyright isn't just copying, it's also referencing it. So you can create many other works basing or changing the original work. Yes?
But if you have not the consent of using also only a reference, why would you do it the same?
Well, first of all, we have to again take into account that the author in this case is dead, so there would be no way to ask for consent for it. And continuing with what I was stating, the opposition team talked continuously about how this would only ruin artworks, bringing up hypothetical scenarios, which is something very important to state, because differently to what the opposition team did, we brought in a concrete example of how instead copyright is limiting creativity, because like in the example of the Yellow King's Tales, which is an expansion on H.P. Lovecraft's original ideas, which was again criticized as was then rated as a very marvelous work of art by the critics at the time. Again, this shows that while in some cases some people may copy, in many other cases people who love the artwork, because we have to take this into account. If we lower the amount of time for copyright, if we lower it to 20 years, people who actually love the work of art, as the first speaker of my team stated, will be able to expand on it, will be able to make it even better than it was before, as has happened throughout history, again with the Yellow King's Knight and many other examples, like for example references to antique authors or the like. And also, continuing with the rebuttal, I would like to, on this point, I would like to reference something the opposition team said. They stated, like I said earlier, that they are against. They think that authors who do not own a work of art don't have the right to gain revenue from it. But again, if we use this definition, then we could also say that the estates, the people who inherit the work of art, who again didn't create the work of art, they just inherited it, they will benefit benefit from it without actually making the work of art. So again, if we go based off their own definition, that means people who inherit the copyright, again, are also unethical by their own definition. Because again, they're exploiting something that they did not make. They're gaining money from it, and they did not make it in any way. And again, going back to the beginning, excuse me. No, thank you. They also talked about licensing. So as the second speaker of my team brought up, another big problem with copyright is the economic problems. Because a lot of authors, at the beginning of their journey, they don't start off as wealthy people. So yes, they can create their own stuff, but a lot of creativity comes up from changing the works of art of the past, or not necessarily copying them, but also using them as references to make something even better. And the opposition team seems to have this skewed, unrealistic worldview, as they stated, and I quote, why don't you buy a license, as if it's something very easy to do? As my teammate stated, this is quite incorrect, because it's not an easy thing to do. As I just stated, many artists don't start off wealthy. So how do you expect them to buy a license when it can cost hundreds, thousands, or even more? Only the biggest companies really have access to these licenses, as we can see currently with movies and such. It's not something that any author, except big companies again, can access. And again, going back to earlier, we talked about also how they also talked about how copyright is important to respect the author. And going back to the points that we brought up, creating new works based off original works is not defacing the author. Yes, there may be some people who copy it, but the point is that if we lower the amount of time that copyright lasts, then we can allow people who actually love the work of art, who actually want to make it better, make their own version, or at least change it in a way that makes the work of art even better than it was before. So, no, thank you. So them saying that it is just being unrespectful to the author is incorrect, because in some cases it may happen, but in many cases, if we lower it, again, the people who actually love the work of art will be alive and will actually have the time to do it. And continuing with this, they also talked about, or continuing with my point actually, I'd like to bring up how, as the first speaker said, at the end of the day, there really isn't as big of a negative effect as much as positive effects. First of all, as the second speaker and first speaker brought up, these companies have billions of dollars. And first of all, going back to what they stated, it is much easier for them to enforce a copyright, even if it's not a legal one. Because we have to keep in mind that by fair use, technically someone should be able to use a reference and create something new with it. But as we've seen in many cases, big companies who want to hoard their IP, their work of art, which again is not theirs, it's of the artists from before who already died, they instead sue the author. So not because they know that they're in the right, but because they know that by suing the author, they have billions of dollars, so they can afford hundreds of thousands of dollars of fees to pay for lawyers, while the authors can't. And so how do we expect this to actually work? This is a very flawed system. So instead, if we increase it, all we're doing is just increasing the power of these big companies and decreasing the power of these small authors who won't ever have the chance to even necessarily use fair use, because as I just stated, in many cases, it gets abused. Or, for example, through lobbying, it can even get extended. And so going back to what I was saying, they also stated that the companies would lose a lot of money if we were to remove the copyright. This is also incorrect, because first of all, they have billions of money before, so they wouldn't necessarily go bankrupt, as a small author would if they lost something very important to them, which they wouldn't, because they'd be able to expand on it with this. But another thing we have to keep in mind is they seem to forget that we still stated that there would be 20 years' time after the author's death, where the company could either create something new, expand on it, or even use it when it's in the public domain, because when the work of art is in the public domain, the company itself can still use it. And with that, I'd like to conclude my speech.
Thank you. And next.
So I thank the third speaker of the proposition team, and now I give the floor to the third speaker of the position team.
Okay, so I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Good evening, everyone. My name is Elisa Bazzanini, and I'm here to rebut most of the topics and of the argumentation of the proposition team. First of all, I want to start with the speech of the first speaker. You talked about the artistic expression that is limited, but as my teammate Julia said, the copyright is the chance to realize and expose new feeling, realities, and also improve, for example, the economy, bringing new artistic products on the market, not just copying or referring to others. But moving your own reality and your own way of producing your things. Then I want to say that the copyright comes in when you don't want or can't declare that you are actually using other people's rights. For example, I want to refer to the willing of, for example, fans to improve the celebrity that they are supporting by using the example of fan arts. Fan arts are usually drawings or maybe piece of writing that the fans write referring to their favorite artist or maybe also some characters, for example, from Disney. Yeah?
You do know that in many cases, some companies actually attack this fan art to try and preserve their art or their artwork, as we have stated, through suing them in court.
You're actually talking about little cases of this, because for example, if you just open Instagram or apps like Pinterest, there are a lot of funners that are also appreciated from the own artists or own producers of the product. So this is, for example, a safe way. Just saying in the description, for example, tagging the artist is a way to say that, for example, you're respecting him or her, and for example, you're, I don't know, referring to Disney film. It's just a way to improve the celebrity of the artist or of the thing that you love, not just breaking the law of the copyright. Then you also, for example, said about the fact that you cannot, for example, use the name of Captain America in your own work. And I want to bring 2 points that try to rebut this thing. First of all, you can actually use it, just to declare it, or just to say that you're inspired by, for example, Marvel, and just, for example, saying that you're giving it the credit. For example, someone that will read or just look to your work of art will read behind, inspired from Captain America from Marvel, and then also Marvel will have the revenue from, for example, this person go and sing the film of Captain America as an example. No, thank you. And actually, you can develop your own creativity, for example, not using their name, but changing it and revising the original story, and bringing also your creativity and your point of view on the market, and maybe also your work can become an actual work of art. No, thank you. Then I want to underline that when the copyright is over, you said that the work is not deleted, but a long time of copyright gives the preservation to the original work to be preserved in a long time. Then, for example, this will help this piece of art being fixed in the history. For example, let's just think about "We Will Rock You" of Queen. If someone will just do it again using the song and declare it as its own, the people will just say, "No, this is not true. It's someone other work," and this is just because this work is preserved by the law of copyright. Otherwise, the next generation, for example, will know the newest version of the song and not actually the original one. And it's not. No, thank you. And it's not good for the artist that originally created the version of the song, of the book, and all the other products. You also said that you will probably not be able to make yourself known in the market without, for example, referring a few or inspiring yourself by using copyright. But I just want to you to know that, for example, first of all, it's a free service. I will try to explain that by using the example of Wattpad. Wattpad is an app for writers that is used is used by the people that want to start writing and want other people to read their books and to like them. And in every story or romance you write, there is the copyright part where you have to agree that everything is created by your own self and the other will not try to copy your own story. So this is a way, for example, to expose yourself to more people and to a huge public without actually copying or referring to something that is already existing, and also protecting the other's work. First of all, I want to say that, for example, stopping art is not stopping referring to things in a not fair way. And you're talking just about the people that are actually referring and not copying these things. But there are also people that try to copy the important work of art that we are talking about. And also in these cases, we have to tutelate the artist and not just trying to avoid that the problem really exists and just focusing on the least big problem that is actually the people that are referring or liking what the product is about. So yeah, not using copyright, you will probably lose the originality of the piece of art that you are talking about. For example, if we talk about a song, maybe this song is involving an important history for the singer or the composer, and is also maybe so important for the own artist. And also after his death, also for the 70 years that copyright is long, the feelings and the importance of the song for this artist have to be preserved and not just used as a marketing or a way to earn more money or make you known. Or if you want to make it a way for let you know to the others, there is something that are called covers, and you can actually make them on YouTube. You can just record yourself while singing that song, saying that it's not your own but it's someone's other, and the people will actually notice you if your talent is true. You also said that, for example, the companies that are accused for copyright doesn't have money, and usually the one that accused for copyright have money. But I want to tell you that the most of, for example, the production companies or of the editors or of the own artists usually starts by not having a lot of money or a lot of fans. So for example, just producing a song that is not so popular, and then tomorrow you will wake up and listen to the same melody to the song maybe of someone really popular because he's seen it and he liked it. Probably you will be so frustrated and also not so happy and not so appreciated in your own way of doing your product. So it's not something that is correlated with money, but it's something that is more correlated as something that is your own work and your own feelings, and you want to promote it as art, not just as marketing or something that is a way to make money. And this is why we think that copyright is a way to preserve the own value of the people that are doing this work, and not making the other sacrifice this value for their own earning money or business. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Admin, it's 19.
19.
19.
So I thank the third speaker of the opposition team, and now it's time for the reply speeches. So I welcome the replying speaker for the opposition team.
I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Today's discussion was about a very important topic, a nowadays topic, I must say. Copyright. Let's make it longer or shorter. The opposition team has certainly confused the value of having copyright on a specific product, on a specific work of art. For this, I'd like to repeat our team line. We want to give the right credit to the artists, since he has to be recognized for his originality and the new creation. So we talked about many point of views from our part, and I talked about other point of views. And I've seen many points of clash. The most important one maybe is the action plan, because the proposition team is not considering the fact that a 20 years model is not enough. It's not enough to demonstrate to future generation how important is a book, a specific song, a specific lyrics. For this, we want to make longer the duration of the preservation of these rights, because we're talking about rights. We talked to you about the example of Primo Levi's book. We talked about many examples. The third speaker has told you many examples that you have to keep in mind, because for proposition team, it's not clear the fact that the work of art has to be respected and has to increase the revenues of who has the credit for have made it. They only talked about one scenario and didn't address the high risk of people that are completely copycats. How did they manage it? How would they imagine this reality? So the actual duration of copyright that we have now is right. We have to maintain it. They do not know how to manage in the future a 20 years duration of copyright. How would you imagine this reality, this perspective that ignores these criminals? Because we're talking about criminals that are still going out there, going outside and destroying our historical and future, historical past and future. Now, for this, I must say that you have to imagine two words. Their words, the proposition words, where we have less respect for what is an artwork, because the proposition team has actually demonstrated to you how copying can be easily made. Our word, otherwise, has the aim to reach more people as possible who listen to a specific subject, to a specific product, to a specific song, to specific lyrics, to a specific book, read to a specific book, and respect the revenue of the creators, the authors, and respect their artwork and humanity, the humanity of the authors. As I said with the example of Primo Levi, that maybe is the most relevant one, because we're talking about the future and the story of our country. Our word as the decoration of something that inspires people, the inspiration that had the specific author in that moment, in that period of life. In this reality, we are the clay of inspiration that can inspire also future generation and can let us imagine how can be our word if we give credits to all the people who makes works, because a 20 years model, their action plan, can be very useful for those creators, for the people who work with those creators. So for this, we must say that we have to maintain the 70 years model of duration of copyrights that we have now. Thank you all for the attention.
4 minutes, 13.
Okay. My speech will start in 3, 2, 1, and go. Hello, everybody. Did you miss me? Because guess what? For maybe the last time, I'm here to do the reply for the opposition team. The proposition team. So, I will start by analyzing the various clashing points during this debate. Then I will tell you who are the stakeholders which were concerned in this debate. And finally, I will tell you why, through our arguments and through our refutations of the opposition's points, we have won this debate. So, first of all, as I said, the clashing points. I have analyzed two main clashing points. The first of all was referencing versus copying. Starting with this, obviously, our team interpreted copyright as referencing also, because this is what happens as the second speaker demonstrated with their speech. We have shown you how copyright can be easily abused, for example, in the case of when fair use is not followed as a law. And we have shown you how copyright can be abused since it covers even smaller reference to that particular work of art, or at least even if it does not. Even in that case, we have seen how big companies, large companies who have the rights to copyright can make smaller artists, or instead just up-and-coming artists, who are able to force them out of the market by simply issuing a lawsuit and bringing them to court, which obviously a lawyer, as the second speaker and the third speaker stated, is extremely expensive, especially for these kind of legal cases. We have given you, in this particular case, one example, which was the Bohemian Rhapsody. Yes, that's a Queen reference, and yes, the creator was sued too. The Bohemian Rhapsody art in JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, as the second speaker stated, which is considered one of the best arcs in the series, but for which the creator had to pay a large, extremely large amount of money to defend himself in court against Disney, and, for example, Disney was one of the companies. So, many other great artists have been forced, or are going to be forced in opposition's word, are going to be forced by companies to go to court, and will lose, obviously, a huge amount of money. And this brings me to the next clashing points, which was our two worldviews. Their worldview was, I would say, pretty naive. They ignored how easily copyright laws are to be exploited, as the second speaker of my team has said. And overall, they have ignored, firstly, this fact, and our solves this, obviously, because as we have stated in our motto, the date cannot be moved, which is not a point that they have actually answered to, because they have ignored how, by lobbying, these companies can move the date of the expiration of the copyright laws. And also it solves other problems like the 2 or 3 generation gap that I have talked about. Finally, our systems prevents, as both the second and the third speaker have said, the loss of art, because when we do not talk about art for 70 years, this art is obviously lost. Referencing is obviously a very important part of modern art, as we have analyzed through this debate. So now the stakeholders, we have talked about large companies who will not lose a penny with this new regulation. We have talked about artists, both rich and up-and-coming, who won't have to lose time and money by battling through court against these large companies. And we have talked about the public, which will now be able to enjoy finding the references in the work. So, overall, to summarize, our team believes that we should reduce to 20 years the duration of the copyright after the author's death, and that we should do this for the various reasons that we have listed. Thank you for your attention. My speech is done.
For me, it's 7, yeah.
So I thank the opposition team and the opposition team for this semi-final, and I invite everyone to be around.